The Welsh Miners Museum is in the Afan Valley, just a few miles from the sea at Port Talbot. The museum sits in the middle of the Afan Argoed Country Park. Glyn Thomas is the museum's director, and certainly its prime mover. He's an ex-miner, like most of his committee members.
Well, if you look at the peak period of mining throughout this valley, in 1921, there were 47 mines in this valley. And gradually you've had the rundown of the mines, and to the present day there isn't any mines at all in the valley. The last colliery closed in this valley in 1970. By 1972 we had a very high unemployment rate in the valley. It was 36% then.
Once, 47 mines and 5 railways. Now, they're all gone.
So it's one of the most beautiful valleys in Wales. It's also the shortest, the narrowest. And as one geologist said when he came here one time, he went through the valley, did a survey. He said the valley is so narrow in parts that the river is going to turn on its side to go through it.
In the early days, you know, many coal miners didn't see the sun until Saturday. Sunday was the one day of the week where families could sit down together.
And this actually is a stall road with a 4-foot seam. Well, the gentleman here is boring into the roof, or the ripples as the term is called, and he would blast that down. He'd pack it into the gob, which is in the bottom region here. And then once it's cleared there, they would put these timbers up. This is called a pair of timber. In fact, you've got one arm here, and a collar. And now, when it comes to payment for these, the official who pays the man who put them up, which would be this person who put them up, he would scribe it as you see it here. He'd have a specific scribe mark, and this then would indicate that the man that cut this timber and put it up has been paid for it. Now, normally there was 2 types of timber used in the mining in South Wales. That was French timber and Norway timber. Well, if it was French timber, it would have a thick bark on it. So what this miner would do to gain another payment for that, he would strip the bark right off. That would take the scribe mark with it. Well, now, if it was Norway timber, he would put another post up under here, take that one out, make another arm and put it under, and that wouldn't have any mark on it. So he would claim payment for it again.
Dr. Tudor Hart was a prime instigator of the museum. Did he think there were too many museums springing up all over the country? 30 new ones every year.
When they were building cinemas for the first time, nobody went around saying, isn't it terrible they're building 30 cinemas? And nobody now would say it would be terrible if we built 30 live theatres. But a museum is a kind of a theatre, should be. Now, we're not talking about dead museums and collections of stuffed bodies and objects and so on. That's ridiculous. That's for dead people to go into, antiquarians. But we're talking about making art improving on nature so that when you see the reality of social history, that's what museums are mainly about, ought to be, it's very, very exciting to see how people lived and what they did and what extraordinary achievements they had. And that gives people a sense of pride and dignity in themselves. And that's what we don't have anymore because we've been cast aside and been told that we're redundant. And by we, I don't just mean the people in this valley. We're just the first.
Like all young people, they will get up to mischief. But generally speaking, this is a good village. Of course, the village watches itself, you see. Each generation watches each generation.
The sort of original farmhouse here, that goes back about 700 years, I think. The farmhouse that my parents live in, that is somewhere in the region of 350-year-old.
And the main thing that brought the change was probably the Forestry Commission, in that they purchased the main proportion of the farms around us.
For the old farmers, they used to judge the value of the land by looking at it visually. And the saying was, it was a Welsh saying, but translated, it meant gold under the bracken, silver under the gorse, and starvation, I'm afraid, under the heather on this type of the land we're on now.
We wanted to have something that you could remember the coal mining in our area.
And this museum that we put here, it's not a memorial, I wouldn't call it a memorial, but as a tribute perhaps to the people who really knew what hard graft work was.
When I started work, my full pay for a week was 11 and sixpence in old money.
15 shillings a week. That's about, what's it, 75 pence now for 6 days underground.
The village I live in was dedicated to education. It was the focal point of the village life, you know.
Looking back now, I don't think it was hard, you see, because we didn't know any different. And there was nobody, the village I come from, there was nobody better than anybody. We were all poor. So you didn't look up at the Joneses, or you were fortunate if you had boots.
Wow.
We had very young children working in the mines. It was actually in 1840 and 42 that the government had a commission in being to investigate the use of women and children in the mines.
And at school, the children listened to statements made to government inspectors by those infants of long ago.
I started work when I was 7, cutting slates in Cornwall. I came to Wales 2 years ago. This is a very wet mine, and once we start work, our feet are never dry. I work every day, so I can't go to Sunday school. I work for about 10 hours a day, and sometimes I get very hungry. I was 6 when I first came down.
Life was so hard, you know, the mortality rate was very, very high. In fact, the average life of a miner in the middle of the 19th century was 40 years of age. There's photographs in the museum showing the women carrying baskets, or they call them corbs in those days, and the average weight of those was about 170 pounds in weight. And it very often took 2 men to lift these baskets onto these women's shoulders. And they would carry them anything up to about 100, 200 yards along the pit bottom itself. And very often up a shallow mine, they would climb a ladder with them. And then about 50 or 60 yards on the surface to a loading point where the coal would be loaded and taken away. And the wages they would have for that then was something about 8p a day.
When I first came to Glencorrwg to teach, I had a ready-made answer for any child who wouldn't do any work. Come on now, I'd say, you must work, you must be able to read, you must be able to write, or you'll never get a job. Well, the fact is now, I couldn't tell them that. So we've had to change our outlook in school, and we now get them to read and write for pleasure, hoping that in later years, the pleasure they've had from learning to read and being able to pick up a book and read will give them some sort of thing to look forward to in their leisure time, which they're going to have an awful lot of.
The creative talents of the young who perhaps will carve out the future of the valley.
The younger element are drifting away from you, and in the end it'll be just an elderly community completely.
The pressures that are on them are quite enormous.
Young people are full of energy. And if one thing is going to kill them quick, is boredom. When they're not able to be useful.
The reason why he got called a fireman actually is because he was actually firing the gas. If he'd go into a roadway and he found it full of gas, it was his place to disperse the gas. And very often what he did, he would try first increasing the ventilation, that is sending more air in there. Well, if this failed, he would clad himself in wet or sack clothing, and then he would have a long stick with a candle on the end, and he would creep in the road and shove the candle right up into where the pocket of gas is. Now this, you know, this person was supposed to be of higher intellect than the rest. But when you think of what he's doing there, like, you know, it was stupid then, really. Because it was just like a woman at home with a cooker, delayed in lighting the gas. And when she goes to light it, whoop, and you just imagine a huge chamber like he's got in there. Well, very often they're maimed, very often they're killed on it.
Always a dangerous job, still is a dangerous job.
Snug. Yes, really, and as I said, everything is authentic in this kitchen because the items were gathered through people coming here, And they seen that you haven't got this, you haven't got that. And in due course, they brought these items in. And in my family, we were 3 boys and my father. And we always came home about the same time. And we would bath in a tub similar to this, because the tub was actually half a barrel, cut in half, where we used to pay, my father used to pay 6p for the barrel, and he'd cut it in half, he'd have 2 tubs out of it. And again then, to bath in this type of thing, you'd strip off the top half, you'd wash the top half first, and then after you wash the top half, we'd be waiting around in our turns. The trousers comes off, everything comes off then, and you'd stand in the tub and wash yourself down.
Morning and welcome to Farmlands Assembly. Today's assembly is about teamwork. We will start by singing the hymn, I Belong to a Family.
Make sure when you tie them, if you tie them tightly to the stick and loosely to the stem, so the stems will room to expand. All that you see was been planted by the children. Some of the trees had been planted about 15 years ago. And originally all it was a bit of vacant land. They brought in about 500 tons of soil and then told us to get on with it. So we got on with it, and all the paths and the trees have been planted by the children. I was born approximately 30 yards from this spot, and I've lived in this area all my life. And taught in this school now. This is my 33rd year.
The community spirit is as alive now as ever it was.